Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 89. Chapter 89. The war was flaming up and nearing the Russian frontier. Everywhere one heard curses on Bonaparte, the enemy of mankind. Militiamen and recruits were being enrolled in the villages, and from the seat of war came contradictory news, false as usual, and therefore variously interpreted. The life of old Prince Bolkonsky, Prince Andrew, and Princess Mary had greatly changed since 1805. In 1806, the old prince was made one of the 8 commanders-in-chief then appointed to supervise the enrollment decreed throughout Russia. Despite the weakness of age, which had become particularly noticeable since the time when he thought his son had been killed, he did not think it right to refuse a duty to which he had been appointed by the emperor himself, and this fresh opportunity for action gave him new energy and strength. He was continually traveling through the 3 provinces entrusted to him, was pedantic in the fulfillment of his duties, severe to cruel with his subordinates, and went into everything down to the minutest details himself. Princess Mary had ceased taking lessons in mathematics from her father, and when the old prince was at home, went to his study with the wet nurse and little Prince Nicholas, as his grandfather called him. The baby Prince Nicholas lived with his wet nurse and nurse Shavishna in the little princess's room, and Princess Mary spent most of the day in the nursery, taking a mother's place to her little nephew as best she could. Mademoiselle Bourrienne, too, seemed passionately fond of the boy, and Princess Mary often deprived herself to give her friend the pleasure of dandling the little angel, as she called her nephew, and playing with him. Near the altar of the church at Bald Hills there was a chapel over the tomb of the little princess, and in this chapel was a marble monument brought from Italy, representing an angel with outspread wings ready to fly upwards. The angel's upper lip was slightly raised, as though about to smile, and once, on coming out of the chapel, Prince Andrew and Princess Maria admitted to one another that the angel's face reminded them strangely of the little princess. But what was still stranger, though of this Prince Andrew said nothing to his sister, was that in the expression the sculptor had happened to give the angel's face, Prince Andrew read the same mild reproach he had read on the face of his dead wife. "Ah, why have you done this to me?" Soon after Prince Andrew's return, the old prince made over to him a large estate, Boguchavarovo, about 25 miles from Bald Hills. Partly because of the depressing memories associated with Bald Hills, partly because Prince Andrew did not always feel equal to bearing with his father's peculiarities, and partly because he needed solitude, Prince Andrew made use of this place. He began building and spent most of his time there. After the Austerlitz campaign, Prince Andrew had firmly resolved not to continue his military service, and when the war recommenced and everybody had to serve, he took a post under his father in the recruitment so as to avoid active service. The old prince and his son seemed to have changed roles since the campaign of 1805. The old man, roused by activity, expected the best results from the new campaign, while Prince Andrew, on the contrary, taking no part in the war and secretly regretting this, saw only the dark side. On February 26, 1807, the old prince set off on one of his circuits. Prince Andrew remained at Bald Hills as usual during his father's absence. Little Nicholas had been unwell for 4 days. The coachman, who had driven the old prince to town, returned bringing papers and letters for Prince Andrew. Not finding the young prince in his study, the valet went with the letters to Princess Mary's apartments, but did not find him there. he was told that the prince had gone to the nursery. "If you please, Your Excellency, Petrushka has brought some papers," said one of the nursemaids to Prince Andrew, who was sitting on a child's little chair while, frowning and with trembling hands, he poured drops from a medicine bottle into a wineglass half full of water. "What is it?" he said crossly, and, his hand shaking unintentionally, he poured too many drops into the glass. He threw the mixture onto the floor and asked for some more water. The maid brought it. There were in the room a child's cot, 2 boxes, 2 armchairs, a table, a child's table, and the little chair on which Prince Andrew was sitting. The curtains were drawn, and a single candle was burning on the table, screened by a bound music book so that the light did not fall on the cot. "My dear," said Princess Mary, addressing her brother from beside the cot where she was standing, "better wait a bit, later." "I'll leave off. You always talk nonsense and keep putting things off, and this is what comes of it," said Prince Andrew in an exasperated whisper, evidently meaning to wound his sister. "My dear, really, it's better not to wake him. He's asleep," said the princess in a tone of entreaty. Prince Andrew got up and went on tiptoe up to the little bed, wine-glass in hand. "Perhaps we'd really better not wake him," he said, hesitating. "As you please, really, I think so, but as you please," said Princess Mary, evidently intimidated and confused that her opinion had prevailed. She drew her brother's attention to the maid who was calling to him in a whisper. It was the second night that neither of them had slept, watching the boy, who was in a high fever. These last days, mistrusting their household doctor, and expecting another for whom they had sent into town, they had been trying first one remedy and then another. Worn out by sleeplessness and anxiety, they threw their burden of sorrow on one another, and reproached and disputed with each other. "Petrushka has come with papers from your father," whispered the maid. Prince Andrew went out. "Devil take them," he muttered. And after listening to the verbal instructions his father had sent, and taking the correspondence and his father's letter, he returned to the nursery. "Well?" he asked. "Still the same. Wait, for heaven's sake." "Karl Ivanitch says that sleep is more important than anything," whispered Princess Mary with a sigh. Prince Andrew went up to the child and felt him. He was burning hot. "Confound you and your Karl Ivanitch." He took the glass with the drops and again went up to the cot. "Andrew, don't," said Princess Mary. But he scowled at her angrily, though also with suffering in his eyes, and stooped glass in hand over the infant. "But I wish it," he said. "I beg you, give it to him." Princess Mary shrugged her shoulders, but took the glass submissively, and calling the nurse, began giving the medicine. The child screamed harshly. Prince Andrew winced and, clutching his head, went out and sat down on the sofa in the next room. He still had all the letters in his hand. Opening them mechanically, he began reading. The old prince, now and then using abbreviations, wrote in his large, elongated hand on the blue paper as follows. "Have just this moment received by special messenger very joyful news, if it's not false. Bennigsen seems to have obtained a complete victory over Bonaparte at Elu. In Petersburg, everyone is rejoicing, and the rewards sent to the army are innumerable. Though he is a German, I congratulate him. I can't make out what the commander at Korchevo, a certain Kandrikov, is up to. Till now, the additional men and provisions have not arrived. Gallop off to him at once, and say I'll have his head off if everything is not here in a week. Have received another letter about the Preuss-Eliau battle from Przenka. He took part in it, and it's all true. When mischief makers don't meddle, even a German beats Bonaparte. He is said to be fleeing in great disorder. Mind you, gallop off to Korchevo without delay, and carry out instructions." Prince Andrew sighed and broke the seal of another envelope. It was a closely written letter of 2 sheets from Bilibin. He folded it up without reading it, and reread his father's letter, ending with the words, "Gallop off to Korchevo and carry out instructions." "No, pardon me, I won't go now till the child is better," thought he, going to the door and looking into the nursery. Princess Mary was still standing by the cot, gently rocking the baby. "Ah, yes, and what else did he say that's unpleasant?" thought Prince Andrew, recalling his father's letter. "Yes, we have gained a victory over Bonaparte just when I'm not serving. Yes, he's always poking fun at me. Oh well, let him." And he began reading Bilibin's letter, which was written in French. He read without understanding half of it, read only to forget, if but for a moment, what he had too long been thinking of so painfully to the exclusion of all else. All right, so that concludes my reading of chapter 89. I'll now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 89. The Wisdom of Choruses. Back with the Bolkonskis, things aren't going so well. Of all of them, the old prince seems to be doing the best, even though he remains his old cantankerous self. The emperor has made him one of 8 commanders-in-chief charged with supervising enrollment for the war against Napoleon. This charge has invigorated him, breathing new life into his battled soul. Just in time, too, because apparently he has aged rather quickly and poorly during the period when he mistakenly believed his son had been killed in the war. Perhaps, though, as the chorus of Oedipus at Colonus would counsel, it would have been better for Prince Andrew if he had been killed. That way, at least, he would avoid all these future and present sufferings. Indeed, there can be no doubt after reading this chapter that he is suffering greatly. His father recognizes Andrew's pain. To do what he can for his son, he has given him an estate of his own, Bogocevaro, some 25 miles south of Bald Hills. Perhaps the solitude of life away from his childhood home will offer Prince Andrew some relief. It doesn't. 3 things in particular contribute to Prince Andrew's suffering and anxiety in this chapter. The first is his absence from the war effort. It's true that he himself resolved not to return to the war. To avoid service, he took a post under his father. We're told, however, that he secretly regrets this decision. Secondly, his son is running a terribly high fever. This leads Prince Andrew to smash some wine glasses on the floor of the nursery, to raise his voice with Mary, and to generally behave like a madman. It's understandable, though. His own brush with death and the passing of his wife during childbirth has made him all too familiar with the capricious and wanton decisions of the Grim Reaper. Finally, he takes great insult from one of his father's letters to him. In this letter, his father orders him to travel to Korchevo as quickly as possible and deliver a message for him. He also informs his son that Bensing has obtained a victory over Napoleon at Elieu. He writes, "When mischief makers don't meddle, even a German beats Bonaparte." Prince Andrew takes this comment as a personal insult because he participated in the losing battle against Napoleon. In short, Prince Andrew is hurting. Andrew, at least in part, brings this anxiety and suffering upon himself. As the chorus of Oedipus at Colonus reminds us, the personal blows of existence are never far from us. What hardship is not near, they cry. Murders, civil strife, quarrels, battles, and resentment. And the next place, at the end, belongs to much disparaged old age, powerless, unsociable, friendless, where all evils of evils are our neighbors. Sophocles recognized this terrible truth way back in the 5th century BC. Nothing much has changed since then. I mean, we have pizza delivery now, so things are marginally better, but not by much. To live in a world like this, pizza or no pizza, it's important to recall that what we've reflected on during these readings. There are things under our control and things not under our control. It's best to struggle with only those things under our control, treating what is not under our control as the inevitable manifestation of a nature's will. What power, after all, do we have over that? Daily meditation. If then the things which are independent of the will are neither good nor bad, and all the things which do not depend on the will are within our power, and no man can either take them from us or give them to us, if we do not choose, where is room left for anxiety? Epictetus, The Discourses. All right, great. So that concludes my reading and reflection on chapter 89. I hope you liked it. Thanks so much for listening. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are below. Your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow we'll be reading and reflecting on chapter 90. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.